You mentioned the word space,
Yes.
and that's where I want to land this conversation today, because as I said in the introduction, one of your research interests is spatial injustice or spatial justice, and you did some research, and I'll name it Black Perspectives in Spatial Justice. You did a
Mhm.
research, you did research in that particular area,
Yep.
and that's the title of it. So here's the question that I want to know, because the term of spatial justice is new for me. I'm sure it's new for some of my listening audience, and we want to know more. We want to learn today. So what is spatiality, and how does spatiality relate to civil rights and justice?
All right. So spatiality, it's the simplest way we can talk about spatiality is thinking about the effects of space on actions, on interactions, and also entities. So you have to think about it in terms of space and people are connected.
Right.
So when we think about like where we came from and how we were brought over to the United States and landing here in 16 and 19, and the narrative that was pretty much placed on, and I'm talking specifically about Black groups, like African American slavery, from
Sure.
slavery into the United States. So we recognize just in that trip over the Middle Passage, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
that space has been a very important piece. And we may be able to talk about water and how that fits in all of this a little bit later, because that's a really big part of it. So you think about one geographical space where you have a group of people, and then another group of people is influencing the movement of that marginalized group of people that
Okay.
they've taken and put into a place that they don't even have residency in, because obviously we know we have indigenous groups that were here before the first colonizers or settlers, or however
Sure.
people want to sort of mention.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing to sort of understand, is that this idea that space and society are connected things and that they have a lot of different levels. So when we think about people being connected to this space and society over a period of time, if people stay in a certain place, places get identified with them. For
Okay.
instance, when we look at where I'm at in Atlanta, Atlanta, depending on who you talk to, is considered a Black Mecca
Right.
and a place for civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
And people ask, if they come from outside of the country, well, why is that the case? Well, when you look at the history of Black leadership here in Atlanta, the history of the civil rights movement, and even when you compare it to towns such as Atlanta and Birmingham,
Mm-hmm.
and what happened when you had leadership in the 1960s and 70s, Black leadership, who sort of pushed Atlanta in a different direction, and sort of what happened in Birmingham in terms of Black leaders not really being allowed to like kind of ascend a
Mm-hmm.
bit. You look at how space sort of impacts those particular pieces. One other piece when we talk about spatial, I think is very important. We also talk about the image of who is perceived to be in a certain space.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit earlier, but you introed about Mr. Floyd
Mm-hmm.
and Mr. Floyd's situation where he literally had police officers that thought he was in the wrong place and that he didn't need to be there, right?
Right.
And
Right.
we think about what that means for certain groups of people, right? For Black people in this country in particular, we're never seen as people who are supposed to belong in any space.
Wow.
So we have been looked at, even though we've contributed a lot to building the country,
Mm-hmm.
we're still looked at as people who are infringers on space.